Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm excited to have on Naomi Kilbreth. Welcome to the show, Naomi.
Thank you, Mason. I'm so glad to be here.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
I'm excited to get to know you more. I've heard several to many of your podcast episodes. By the way, dear listener, if you're not already subscribed to the Family Herbalism podcast on your podcast player of choice, go ahead and hit pause right now. Go subscribe to that. Naomi's got a ton of awesome episodes. In fact, your latest episode, you delve into the importance of water, which water is not an herb. But I really want to get into a little bit of that episode. I thought it was really fascinating, and you just really dissect that whole topic really well. But we'll get to that later. For now, let's get to know Naomi a bit more. Naomi, how did you get into this whole herbalism thing?
Well, it did start back in my childhood a little bit. I actually just recently listened to an episode where you interviewed Megan Rhodes,
Oh, yeah.
and she went into her story about being the reader who stayed inside and reflected on Belle from Beauty and the Beast. And I thought, that's me. We could be best buds.
That's awesome.
I really was, an indoor kid and had to be shooed outside to play. I lived out in the country, and so I did spend a fair amount of time outdoors. And actually, the funny thing is that one of my favorite things to do outside was play in what we call the bamboo shoots. And we'd make all these forts and stuff out there and have a great time. And it wasn't until I was grown up that I found out that that isn't actually bamboo. That's Japanese knotweed. And that plays a big role in my family today for a variety of reasons. But even though I kind of had that start of learning about these plants that were growing outside of my family's house, I had to go through a season of learning about birth first, actually, because birth is what drew me. I thought I was going to be in the health fields as a home birth midwife. And I started out, actually, I had the opportunity to be a mentee of a home birth midwife. And that was where I got exposed to herbalism for the first time. She was, of course, as a midwife, she was interested in all the nutritional herbs for her clients. And that's where I learned about dandelion and nettle and red raspberry and all of those plants. And until that point, I thought that tea in general was just something people drank if they didn't like coffee, it's like it just tastes good.
Funny.
So that was a lot of fun learning that plants had a helpful attribute to them, and they could be supportive in helping us to stay on the path of wellness. And so then after, a season of being with this midwife and being her mentee, I worked as a doula for several years. And it really wasn't until I started having kids that herbalism meant something to me personally. And so my first plant was comfrey. And after that, that was all history, right? It's all she wrote.
Totally. Do you have comfrey growing on your yard?
I do. And in fact, I did. You're not supposed to do this in some places, but I do have some comfrey that I transplanted when we moved out behind our house. And I have since found it popping up around the new building that we created for the clinic. And I thought it was so fitting that my first plant is now also growing all on its own right around my new space, my workspace.
So you're a clinical herbalist. Do you still do some doula work as well?
Only when I have a sibling who's having a baby and they want me present.
Right. Right.
I've actually had the honor of being at 5 of my nieces and nephews' births.
That's cool.
And I may at some point get back into that again. But in this season where my kids are still at home, my focus has largely been on clinical herbalism.
Very cool. Yeah, it reminds me of Amanda. She's a photographer, and she does all of the, her friends' wedding photos and baby photos and stuff like that. So yeah, anytime someone needs that, they utilize their services, much like you provide those doula services to friends and family. But so curious, who have been some of your mentors along the way?
Well, absolutely. The midwife that I mentored with, her name is Jan Wilson. And even though birth was really her specialty, if it wasn't for her, I might not have learned about herbs in the first place. And, really one of the best places to start with herbalism is learning about the nutritional value of many of the what we'd call safe herbs that are great starter herbs. And also they continue to be wonderful herbs throughout the rest of our lives. But she's the one that introduced those to me. And then after that, Demetria Clark, who runs the Birth Arts International School and the Heart of Herbs Herbal School, I attended 2 of her programs for herbalism and aromatherapy. And so I interacted with her a bit, and I was just inspired by how she blended herbalism with midwifery together. It just seemed like the perfect union, and I loved watching her business grow and her programs develop as well. And then since then, Matthew Wood and Phyllis Light have definitely been an inspiration to me. I attended their holistic assessment skills program, and I just had some great conversations, and I loved listening to the back and forth between them. They're such unique people with unique perspectives, and I love how they bring it together in their classes. So that has always inspired me as well.
Did you study with those 2 in person, or was that online?
It was all online, actually.
Oh, nice. Wow.
Yep.
You still got that like in-person feel. It sounds like you really got a sense of their teaching style, even though you're able to learn so much through these online classes. Sometimes, in person can be a little better, but it sounds like you took a lot away from those online classes.
Yeah, I absolutely took it very seriously. For
Sure.
me, it would have been wonderful if I'd had the opportunity to attend classes in person. But because I didn't, that meant that this was all the more important for me to really dedicate myself to my learning in that way. And so, anytime I had questions, I could message them and we'd have conversations. But when I sat down to attend a class, I was there fully present with my headphones and my notepad, and this was game on.
Yeah, I had a conversation on the Herbalist Hour as well with Howie Brownstein. He's my OG herbal mentor, and that's the way he kind of looks at it too. Is it's really the intent behind taking these online courses. If you just sign up and you just kind of half-ass it or whatever, you're not really going to get much away from it. But if you do it like you did it, you show up each and every time, and you really treat it as if you're going to an in-person school. Then yeah, it sounds like you're going to take a lot away from that.
Absolutely.
Well, why don't you kind of set the stage for us? Where are you? Actually, I want to say you're in Maine, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So, yeah, please.
Sure. So I have actually always lived in Maine, and right now I actually live about 20 minutes from my childhood home. So I haven't gone very far.
Okay.
But when I first got married, my husband and I lived in not really a rural area, but it was a little busier of an area with houses right next door. And when we got married, he was ready to start a homestead, but I wasn't quite ready for that yet. I think I needed the stability of, buying a house and that was already ready to live in and starting out that way. But of course, nothing is ever that simple. And so we ended up taking an adventure. Had some little, rabbit trails and things here and there. But what happened was how we got to where we are now is that during the 2009 housing bubble burst, when the construction industry kind of went kaput, my husband lost his job. He was building high-end vacation houses for people who invest in the stock market. And when the stock market crashed, that meant his job wasn't quite as stable. And so even though his employer was so gracious and tried very hard to keep everybody employed, there wasn't enough work. And so we decided to turn lemons into lemonade, and we decided to fast track our vision of creating an off-grid homestead. And we bought a camper and moved it onto family property, which my in-laws owned at the time. And now we've inherited it. So it's our home now officially. And so we moved our camper out to the middle of nowhere on this 20-acre lot. And we lived in the camper for several years. Once he did get employed again, we started scrimping and saving and built our house with cash. He built almost all of it entirely himself. Wow. And we moved in 6 years later in 2017. And so we've been in that same house since then, which is also off-grid. And during that process too, we also added a child to our family, because when we moved, we had 3 kids. And then a year later, we added another child to our family. And I wrote all about it in a book too. Coming Home is the name of it, by Naomi Kilbreth. And I have copies on hand. If anybody's interested in a signed copy, I'd be happy to sign those and mail them out too.
Awesome. So you'd find the book at laureltreewellness.com.
LaurelTreeWellnessLLC.com.
Yes, I forgot that part. Okay.
That's
awesome.
right.
I will get the correct link in the podcast show notes, as well as the YouTube description, etc. So Amanda and I, we love to watch these shows where they basically renovate homes and whatnot. And it's always just kind of like this fantasy of ours. But I have to imagine there's like a lot of work that goes into that. They make it seem so glamorous on TV, but can you tell us about some of the trials and tribulations? Was it all worth it? Yeah, just kind of run me through that.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I just had an opportunity to give my first author talk about this very topic. And so, that's a common question. How do you make it work? And like you were saying, there's a lot of information out there, but when push comes to shove, the application can sometimes be different than what you expect when you're watching videos and reading books. And I certainly did my fair share of that, because I needed to prepare myself as much as I possibly could beforehand. So I followed all the blogs and I watched all the YouTube videos and I did all of that. But when we moved here, we realized right away that we needed to be flexible. And, there's only so much you can prepare for, because there will be surprises. When we first moved here, we actually didn't know what we were going to do for water, because we didn't have a well. We didn't really have a good source. So we ended up trucking in water from my in-laws in the next couple towns over. And then we were storing larger containers of water for a little while. And eventually we were able to build a small rainwater collection system. And we had a dug well for a little while. That didn't work out as well as we would have liked it to. And currently we have a large enough roof that we're able to collect all the water we need for the entire year. And we have a special filtration system now that allows us to actually drink that water. So we don't depend on anybody for our water at this point.
That's amazing. So that's how you're taking showers and baths as well, with all that water you're collecting?
Exactly. The only thing that we can't do is laundry. We still use a laundromat, which we do once a week. We call that our date night. My husband and I go out to the laundromat. We take walks while we're waiting for the laundry to dry. But it just uses so much water, and we just don't have the storage capacity for that at this point in time.
Just a quick break from the show to let you know about our HerbRally Schoolhouse, our private member area where, HerbRally already comes out with a ton of free content, but if you'd like to get even more exclusive content, check out herbally.com/schoolhouse. You could use coupon code SCHOOLHOUSE30 at checkout to get your first 30 days for free and see inside the member area. There's a ton of exclusive classes specifically for our members. There's herbal community discounts. There's a private member area where you could interact with the other members as well. Another perk is you get the ability to hang out with us live on the Herbalist Hour podcast. You could ask questions, etc. So that's a super fun perk, which we're really excited about. Huge shout out and thank you to all of our HerbRally Schoolhouse members. It's really one of the best ways you could support our work here at HerbRally. So thank you so much. And now back to the show. What's your community like? Are folks around you pretty into this whole herbalism thing, or what's the population and everything where you're at?
I'm not sure of the exact number of people living in this community, in this town, but I can tell you that from our house, we can just barely see a couple houses through the trees.
Okay.
We have a few neighbors that we'd say are within stone's throw, but it's not too populated. Sure. And herbally, I think that's changed a lot since I started. When I first started working with herbs for my kids, it was in the form of making diaper rash salves and herbs for nursing and things like that. And I didn't know anybody, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 people, I think, who were at least familiar with like mother's milk tea. But now I would say I mean, maybe this is partly because I talk about herbs so much to everybody I know, but I would say that there are a lot more people in our area who are familiar. And when I start conversations about herbs, they jump right into it. Like, oh yeah, I've been learning this and that about these wild plants and things like that. So it's definitely changed over the course of the past 15, 20 years.
Well, yesterday I was perusing your Instagram page, and I want to say that's where I read this, but maybe it's your website, but it looks like you have one of the top podcasts for anyone who has podcasts in Maine. Did I get that right?
Yeah, we were nominated. The podcast was nominated as one of the top 100 for the state of Maine for this year. And so that was really exciting to be included in the list. I didn't have any idea we're even being considered for that. So
yeah, I've never heard of a list like that, but I'd be curious if HerbRally is in a top Wisconsin podcast list or something like that. But I'll also that'd be rad. But I'll shout out Bridget Doherty is also an herbalist in Maine, and she's got a podcast called the Healthy Herb Podcast. Lots of herbal type people out there in Maine. I would have to imagine lots of back to the lander type folks. And yeah, sounds like a righteous community. That's one of the states I've never been to. I've probably been to like 35 states, but never Maine. Looks absolutely gorgeous. But so speaking of your community and herbalism, as I mentioned, you're a clinical herbalist. Do you primarily see clients online or in person or both? Yeah, and just in general, how do you make a living as an herbalist?
Absolutely. So at this point in time, I would say it's about half and half, where half the clients that I see are in person. And I currently meet with clients in my office in Auburn, Maine. So if anybody's familiar with Maine, it's the Auburn-Lewiston area, which is about 40 minutes outside of Portland. And so I meet with people there in person, and then I also meet with people all over the place through either Zoom or through the new program that I'm using called Practice Better. And so that's where I spend most of my time, is in the consulting. I see probably anywhere from, I would say 8 to 10, 6 to 10 people a week that I'm working with right now, and my hours will be expanding this summer. So I'm excited to be able to reach more and more people in that way. And at the same time, I also, so I offer these consultations where I meet with people and help them to identify herbs that are going to be best suited to them based on their tissue states and their goals and their experiences. But then also, a lot of the people who come to see me haven't worked with herbs before, and I don't want to leave them empty-handed. So I actually create custom blends, mostly teas and tinctures, although my assistant is now helping me with capsules too. So we've expanded a little bit there. And that way, when people come to see me, they always leave with something. So that's primarily where I work. But I also do offer some educational opportunities. As you've probably seen on the website, I have a couple classes available there. I will often do herb walks in the summer based on interest. So some years are busier than others, and sometimes I do them here at my home, and sometimes I will actually travel and do them for other people at their homes, and they invite their own friends. So that's a lot of fun. And then I started a new mentorship program where I help 1 to 2 people a year, just who are already taking educational classes. They're already going through programs, and they just want to have the opportunity to practice what they've been learning. And so that's been a new exciting thing that I've been working on as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, herbalists have to wear lots of different hats to make this work, and it sounds like you're doing just the same. So it's always encouraging for me to hear about how folks are making a living as an herbalist. So thank you for sharing. Now, I know part of your background is you're a Christian herbalist, and I'm just kind of curious, how does your faith as a Christian inform your work as an herbalist?
I appreciate you asking that.
Of course.
Like you said, I identify as a Christian, and many of the herbalists that we hear talking about and sharing in our communities have, if they identify with spirituality, have more of an earth-based spirituality, which makes me a little unique, but not too much, because there actually are quite a few Christian herbalists out there. And I know several personally, which was always, it's fun to meet new herbalists that you can connect with in different, personal values. But I do get people asking me what that looks like, because I think there's this common conception that herbalism is a quote unquote witchy thing to do. And generally Christians will stay away from things that look pagan. But I think this is a great opportunity to kind of meet in the middle, because even though the worldviews of Christianity and earth-based spirituality they can see things very differently, we all agree that herbs can be very important to living a healthy lifestyle, that they're effective, they can be a great resource. And so from my perspective, I see that what unites us with the earth is that God created the earth for us to live on, and he made it a beautiful place. And he also made it a place where we can be in relationship with him. And he also made us as a reflection of who he is. And so one of the first things that he did was give us a purpose, which was to take care of the earth, to cultivate growing things. And so right away, you look at the Bible and you see that we learn that regardless of what work we do in the world, that God created this beautiful earth, and he created us to be in relationship with him, and he created us to be in partnership with him. And then when it comes to herbalism specifically, we see that just by looking around at the world, we can see who God is in his creation, that we can see his power and his creativity and his love. And actually, one of the things that really inspired me in this journey was reading an herbalist. I wish I could remember the name of the book. Cannot remember off the top of my head, but they said that there's so much science involved now in herbalism, and we can see that a lot of the chemical constituents in plants, we can identify them and we can say, oh, this serves this purpose for the plant. It helps protect it. It helps it grow. It keeps it safe, and we can also see how those chemical properties help people. But she was saying that there are a number of chemical properties that we actually don't know how they serve the plant. We know they're there, we've identified them, but we don't know how it helps the plant. However, we know that they help people. We know that those specific constituents support people in being healthy. And she was suggesting, even though she wasn't a Christian, she was suggesting that that's a gift from a higher power. Cool. And I absolutely agree with her. That's very true. And today, God is actively involved in our lives. And for me as an herbalist, I feel that the way that faith informs my work really started with how I got started as an herbalist. I have a history with trauma. And one of the things that I used to do was quit things that were really important to me. So I would get started, I would be all passionate about it, and then I would quit. And it just felt unsafe to me. And so when I started Laurel Tree Wellness, there were so many times where I just felt like, nope, this is it. This is my boundary. I can't go any further. But it was actually messages that I kept getting. I would flip open the Bible and I would read a verse, or I would hear my pastor say something and I would say, you know what? He's encouraging me. He's telling me to keep going, to do the hard thing, to stick it out. And after like a couple of years of that, I realized why I was doing this work and how important it was, not just to potential clients, but also to my personal healing journey. So right from the start, if it wasn't for my relationship with God, the business wouldn't even be here. I can absolutely say that. And then today, I pray before I go into appointments that I'll have wisdom, that I'll be able to listen carefully and be fully present with my clients, kind of setting the stage for appointments where I can be, fully present with my clients and understand their needs. And, so many times I've been sitting with a client and then an herb will pop into my head, like the intuition that many herbalists will talk about as being an important aspect of, either connecting with the plants or just having a basic educational knowledge of the plants, and then being receptive to those intuitive hits where we know what herb is going to be helpful for a certain person. But where I'm praying before these appointments, I really feel that when that happens, that is inspiration that God is also providing for me. Now, I do work with all people. I don't work with just Christians. I actually, even though I declare my faith publicly, like on Instagram and on my website, I don't actually bring it up at visits. I will I will certainly talk about it if a client brings it up, if they want to talk about spirituality, or if they found me because I'm a Christian and they're excited about that, we'll talk about it. But otherwise, I just leave the door open because I realize that everyone's coming from a different perspective and not everyone is interested in Christianity, and that's okay. I'm there primarily to help them in a physical way. But I also think that it's really important for clients to feel comfortable with the care providers that they work with. And where some Christians, have hesitations around, some of the more pagan practices that can be associated with herbalism, I just love putting it out there that this is who I am, so that if they do feel that's important to them, then they can relax into their journey and just enjoy that process of working with herbs so that they can feel better and reach their health goals. So long-winded answer. That's kind of how my faith, I guess, impacts or influences how I work as a clinical herbalist.
That's all so beautiful. So much good stuff there, Naomi. Thank you for sharing that. I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember which interview this was in, but it came to mind that I want to say that someone mentioned the doctrine of signatures was started by a Christian herbalist. Do you know what I'm referring to? The doctrine of signatures with like plants and how they look like a certain body part or whatever like that. Does this ring a bell to you, or do you know anything about that?
I do remember it coming up in a recent podcast. I do not remember the name of the person who developed that theory.
Okay.
But I agree. I think that it goes right in line with that idea that God created the plants and communicated with us about his intention for them to be healing.
Very good. Well, I agree with you. I think you should put it out there that you're a Christian and an herbalist and all these things. And I just, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was because you are a Christian. And I just think it's rad that there's so many different types of people. And I just wish there would be stop being so much judgment around this type of person or that type of person. And, we're all humans here. we all have love of the plants. And, I don't know. It just gets me riled up sometimes. And, anyways, I respect you, Naomi. And, I appreciate what you're doing and, everything that you're putting out there in the world. So thank you, for doing what you do and for listening to God and doing your thing. And, just, all of the work that you're doing. So I just really appreciate it. I just want to say that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that as well.
Of course. And I did want to say also, like you said, there's a lot more Christian herbalists out there than you might actually think. Because when I worked at Mountain Rose Herbs, a lot of our customers were Christian and herbalist and stuff like that. So I just remember that was a large portion of some of their customers. I also wanted to say at one point or another, there was a Christian herbal gathering or conference of some sort. I don't know if you know of any sort of event like that, but you're right. It does seem like a lot of the herbal conferences, so to speak, are kind of more around, like, say, the earth-based spiritualities as opposed to Christianity. Do you know of any herbalism events based around Christianity?
Yeah, actually, so there is a group called the Christian Herbalist Group, or the Guild, Christian Herbalist Guild, and they started a Christian Herbalist conference that happens on a yearly basis. I have not attended yet, I have to admit, but I believe it is virtual, and they have a group of herbalists that get together and teach classes, webinars that others can attend. And they also offer a registration process which is similar to the American Herbalist Guild. And I'm actually in the process of going through that myself. It's pretty extensive, so I'm taking my time working through it. But I have been able to so there is a network of Christian herbalists that are being united together through this guild, which is really exciting.
That is exciting. Well, before the interview, I remembered, I read this book by this guy named Jordan Rubin. Now, I want to say Jordan is I want to say he has a Jewish faith, if I'm getting that right. But he wrote a book called The Maker's Diet. And I probably read this close to 20 years ago, is when I was really getting into nutrition. I was also identified as a Christian at the time. And anyways, the whole thesis of the book is displaying nutrition concepts that are in the Bible. I want to say it's in Leviticus specifically. And I'm just kind of curious if you have any feedback, if you ever read that book. And most importantly, are there herbal concepts in the Bible that you're aware of?
Oh, yes. So, as far as the Maker's Diet goes, I have not read that book, although it sounds amazing. I've heard of similar, like there's a nutritionist, a Christian nutritionist who has a podcast that speaks to food guidelines that are offered in the Bible. And so there are some resources out there, but no, that's a new one for me. I'll have to look into that. So thank you.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so there's actually a ton of references throughout the Bible on not just herbs, but all kinds of growing plants, spices, and trees and shrubs and things like that. And so I looked it up. There's actually a website called BibleGateway.com, and you can look up specific references if you're curious about where these plants can be found. But they identified over 100 plant species that are named in the Bible. And there are literally thousands of verses about spices and about plants and about trees and different things. You can look up each of those different references separately if you want to. But it's all throughout the Bible. And because it's not just about healing, it was like you're saying, it's for food. They also used herbs for rituals, for perfume, and it was also at the time used for gifts and for trade because they were so valuable. So there's a lot of analogies throughout the Bible that incorporate plants as well, because plants were of the people. They were a commonly understood practice of eating them and working with them as medicine. Actually, one of my favorite references it comes from an unlikely place. It actually comes from the book of Jeremiah, which is kind of a sad book, but it was full of prophecies about the Jewish people being in captivity. And there was a reference to the Balm of Gilead. And of course, we know Balm as being a salve or salve, depending on how you say it. And then Gilead
I'm Team Salve.
Right? Gilead was a region in Israel, and they were known for producing this miracle first aid salve. And so there are references in the Bible that refer to this salve-like remedy that people would use for healing. And today, the Balm of Gilead has been identified as having a specific shrub remedy, and I can't remember the name of it. But one of the reasons that this is my favorite is because salves were my first remedy, or one of my very first remedies that I worked with. And now it's kind of the running joke in my family that if my kids come to me and they hurt themselves, they're complaining, I scraped my knee. The first thing I'm going to ask is, did you put salve on it? And so I feel like that's kind of biblical, it's like, that's
Absolutely.
where we started from.
Absolutely.
But yeah, there's so many references. The Proverbs even are full of references to lifestyle things that I love to incorporate into my wellness, recommendations that I make, like laughter and putting yourself in a place to hear good news and how important those are for your soul. Jesus went around telling people about salvation, and then he would heal them. And so the two always went together. And then the bookends, of course, the common verses we hear from Genesis and Revelation about the plants that are used for food and for healing. So I feel like, if I were to leave one thought with the listeners, it would just be that God wants us to be healthy and happy, and he has a heart for healing, both for our spirits and for our bodies. And so that's why I think that he left all those references in the Bible for us to just keep coming back to over and over again.
Amen. Do you have any, just like the Maker's Diet is kind of a nutrition book based around the Bible, do you know of any herbalism books based around the Bible?
I do, and I will have to provide you with the name of the book that I'm thinking of afterwards. You can include that in the show notes if you want to. But there is a book that I read that shared about the history and practice of Christian herbalism, and I found it very encouraging. It talked about, the practices of monks, Catholic monks, and how they were actually required to keep gardens with medicinal herbs because it was like their responsibility to care for both the body and the soul. So there's a lot of really cool references in there that I think are fun to go through.
Yeah, I'll have to get that link from you after the fact, and we'll leave links in the podcast show notes. And dear listener, if you're listening on YouTube, feel free to comment below with any books that you know of that relate to herbalism in the Bible. I'd be very curious. So, well, why don't we talk about some of the plants? Before the call, I asked you which plants might you want to talk about. You named a few. You said you even might have some stories about some of these. So why don't we start with a ubiquitous plant that I have grown to love living here in the Midwest, which I'm presuming it's also in Maine as well, but that's goldenrod. Can you tell us a little bit about goldenrod, your love for it, and all of that jazz?
Absolutely. So yes, it does grow out here, and there are a number of different species of goldenrod in the Solidago family, and they're largely interchangeable when it comes to using them for health practices. The species that grows the most in our area is Canadensis, or Canada goldenrod. And it's one of my favorites to tell people about when we go on herb walks, because it's frequently blamed for seasonal allergies. And really, it's usually the common ragweed that's a little bit more inconspicuous and hides nearby that causes the flare up of this histamine response. And so I like to clear up that misunderstanding on these herb walks. And I think that, usually the hesitation that people rightly experience is relieved by the end of it, which is fun to see. But goldenrod was actually one of the first plants that I realized was an example of how God weaves healing opportunities into our lives. Maybe you've heard this. Oftentimes, the herb that you need most is growing right outside your door. And I find that is true so often. It's almost the rule for me. And I frequently ask clients, what's growing outside of your door? Okay, well, let's see. How can we weave that into our conversation here? But one of my kids, when he was about 2, had a seriously bad case of bronchitis. We were, looking for the blue lips and everything. And it was a very uncomfortable virus that he dealt with. And as a result, he developed cough variant asthma. And so usually with asthma, you gasp to breathe in, but he was coughing to breathe out. And he dealt with that for several years. And at the time, I didn't really know as much about wildcrafting. I had my resources with essential oils and some different herbs that we worked with. And he did eventually recover. But after that all happened, I learned that goldenrod can be really supportive to those with asthma because it's a vulnerary and it's also antispasmodic. So it's soothing to the lungs and helps to calm down those agitated coughs. And then it hit me that goldenrod grows like all over our property. It was everywhere. And so even though it was after the fact and we didn't really need it at that point, it was just another confirmation that I was on the right track and that this was an important plant for me to keep as part of my repertoire of resources for future use. So goldenrod, it is also useful for the urinary tract. I do frequently use it for bladder and kidney support, and also for immune regulation. So anyone who has a response to antihistamines, oftentimes they can, or they have a reaction to histamine, they can be supported by herbs like goldenrod.
Are you using that in tincture or tea or both?
Both. I go back and forth. It depends on the person and the context. Very often for lung support, I like working with tea because I think you can also, you can get that mug right up underneath your face and just breathe in the steam, and you're going to get some of the essential oils from that as well.
So yeah, I've grown to appreciate that plant mainly because of its beauty. I find it quite beautiful, but I've actually never, as far as I know, consumed it in a tea or tincture. I'll have to give that a try at some point.
Absolutely.
But you were speaking about plants that grow right outside your doorstep. And I know that you mentioned this earlier, but Japanese knotweed, that's also outside your doorstep, right?
Yes, it is. So like I said, I grew up with that. It was near my parents' home. But then when we moved here to this new property, the whole back end of the property was covered in it. And I guess at the beginning of our homestead story, the field that we currently live in was bush hogged, which of course, stirs up the root system and they start growing like mad after that. And it has settled down since, but it still grows very happily in my backyard and I don't mind it being there. So in the Latin name is Polygonum cupsidatum. And it is also, I think, a misunderstood plant because of how it grows. It can take up a lot of space and it will grow very rapidly, especially when the root system is agitated when you try to rototill it under and things like that. And so some people don't appreciate it, but all parts of the Japanese knotweed plant are useful for food and medicine. And so I first learned about it in a medicinal context with Lyme disease, because my son developed Lyme disease, of course, after we moved here where all the ticks are.
Right.
And then I also developed Lyme disease later on. And I learned about the Stephen Buhner protocol and made an adapted version of that, which primarily relies on Japanese knotweed. And it worked. And he was able to fully recover. And he has absolutely no pain, no joint swelling or anything like that anymore. Hasn't for a long time. And I am almost completely recovered. I say almost because I didn't catch mine quite in time. So I still have a few neurological things that I'm working on healing from. But Japanese knotweed got a lot of respect from me after that whole experience, for sure. And we've actually used it for food as well. The little shoots are delicious, saute them up in a pan just for a couple minutes, and they're very good.
Pretty nutritious too, I'd imagine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, lots of different, it's actually tastes very similar to rhubarb. Like raw rhubarb has that sweet and sour sort of taste. And I think that's why Japanese knotweed is also used. The stalks are also used in some desserts. I haven't tried it in desserts. I did try creaming it once, cooking it down, blending it up, and then using it as a sauce. But it needed a little bit of work. So I'm still perfecting that.
I got to try that. I was curious what the plant family was, and of course it's the Polygonaceae.
Right.
Call it the genus Polygonum, right?
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's talk about one of my personal plant allies, lemon balm.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's, I mean, why don't you talk to us about lemon balm?
Okay. Well, I was ready for you to jump in. So Melissa officinalis, this is one of my favorite herbs, largely because it's so gentle and so supportive for so many people. There's a lot of herbs we have to be very careful about because they're not always the best fit for people, and there can be a lot of medication interactions. Young kids and elderly folks, we got to be careful about how strong of herbs we're working with. And lemon balm is safe for almost everybody. The one exception we sometimes have to be cautious of is if they are experiencing underactive thyroid function for some people, and this is disagreeable depending on which herbalist you talk to. For some people, they feel that it can be too calming, too sedating, and slow down the thyroid function even more. So we have to be aware of that. But for the most part, it's a very, very safe plant. It has a lovely taste. So I find that even kids who are picky will tolerate working with lemon balm. But one of my favorite reasons for working with it is because most people who are experiencing some kind of illness are also experiencing stress at the same time. They're stressed out about their illness. They're wondering how they're going to get better. Maybe it's impacting their sleep, their income, other areas of their lives. And lemon balm is just so relaxing, so supportive that regardless of what you're dealing with, I feel like it's a great addition to a lot of blends. And then my story with the lemon balm has to do with, again, one of my kids, because this is how I learned a lot of the plants. When he was about 10 years old, we had just moved into our new house. And so we had new sleeping arrangements. We were kind of spread out a little bit more because we'd been in the camper for so long. And he has a more of an anxious, uptight personality in general. And he had developed this habit of, in his effort to fall asleep and having a hard time falling asleep, he would tell us, "Don't go to sleep," because he was worried that he would be the last one awake that night. And then he'd be all by himself, and he was worried about that. So he would tell me every night when I said goodnight, "Don't go to sleep." And I would say, "Okay, buddy," and I'd check on him before he went to sleep or before I went to bed to make sure he was asleep. And I thought, lemon balm would probably be quite relaxing to him and just reassuring to help him remember that everything I've told him about being safe and being close by is all true. And so I made him a tea, and I decided to go with a very small amount. So lemon balm a 10-year-old kid could drink a whole mug full and it's going to be great. But I actually wondered what would happen if I gave him small sips. And so I think he had 2 or 3 sips the first night. And then we did it again the next night. And by the third night, he stopped asking me to stay awake, and he never did again. He was done. And he still stays up late, but I think he just made peace with the fact that he's a night owl and he found things to do that he enjoys in the evening, but it wasn't a cause for anxiety anymore. And we didn't even continue doing that nightly tea. It just made that much of an impact for him.
So cool. I suppose I'll share a little bit of about lemon balm as well, and also has to do with my kiddo Amelia. She's 12 now, but back when she was like 3, we had a swing set in our backyard, and I remember every time she'd swing forward, and then on her way back, she'd go, more lemon balm, and I'd shove a little lemon balm leaf in her mouth, and she'd just chew it the whole time she swang. And it was just such a fun little thing that we had, and to this day, she still remembers that. But I really appreciate what you said about how gentle lemon balm is, but as Jim McDonald says, gentle does not mean weak. And so I feel like I have a certain type of constitution where a lot of times I feel like I need a lot of an herb to feel something. With lemon balm, when I drink the tea, I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about it. It's just like, it's so calming and uplifting for me. I feel like linden is kind of a similar story for me. Linden, lemon balm, they're just both very mood elevating for me, very gentle, but also very effective. I've heard that, like, say, when you're making nourishing herbal infusions, you're not supposed to use aromatic herbs. But I will make like a nourishing, quote unquote, herbal infusion with lemon balm, and that seems to really do the trick for me. The other thing I wanted to mention was we recently were trying to develop a fire cider recipe, and this one that was gifted to us from Rishi Strauss. We were surprised and delighted to see that on the back of the bottle, she actually put lemon balm in her fire cider. I thought that was so cool. I'd never seen anyone do that before. So shout out Rishi Strauss with Earth and Spirit Botanicals, I want to say. And last but not least, I discovered infusing it in Pinot Gris is also kind of fun and nice as well, the wine. But anywho, that's enough of my jabbering, but I figured I'd just share since you asked. But do we got time to chat about one more plant?
Sure. Yeah, but before we do, though, I want to just mention this really quick, that you said your daughter her name is Amelia, and she's 12 years old. Yeah. My baby is 12 years old, and her name is Amelia.
No way. What's her middle name?
Lena.
Okay, we got Amelia Sage over here. So, all right, very cool. Thanks.
Nice.
Great name. Those old school names are making a comeback. I love it.
They sure
cool.
are.
Well, how about a skullcap?
Yeah, Scutellaria baclensis is the Chinese version, and then you have Scutellaria latifolia, which is the American, and both have a strong impact on the nervous system. I really got familiar with Chinese skullcap in the case of Lyme disease because it's frequently used as a nerve tonic. And I found that it can be very supportive to a number of the symptoms that people experience with Lyme disease. But also the American version is great for the nerves too. And so for a lot of cases, they can be, I find, pretty interchangeable as well. One of the things that I love about skullcap is that even though it has kind of a scary sounding name, it's actually also quite safe for school age kids and up. And I find that where kids when they feel overwhelmed, overstimulated by new experiences, maybe going to a new classroom with new teachers, or they're in a situation where there's a lot of new information coming in that they need to process and be okay with, that it helps them to process those more anxious feelings, and even to the point of helping also with insomnia. I have a number of adult clients who use a skullcap quite frequently for insomnia cases. Excuse me. And so I will say that sometimes skullcap does have interactions with medication. So it is one that we have to be a little bit more cautious about for people who have maybe more complicated health pictures. And for them, I will usually refer back to lemon balm if I feel like skullcap is a good fit, but it's just not well suited to them because of medications. But one of the places that I use it the most really is with Lyme disease. And I've seen it stop tremors associated with Lyme disease. issues, restless leg syndrome, symptoms of like ADHD, really anywhere where a person is just super tight and wound up. It can just be a powerful relaxant to help them chill out and feel more comfortable.
Yeah, I don't use Skullcap too often, but yeah, it's awesome to hear how effective it is for certain people with certain types of constitutions. And again, dear listener, I want to say you could get a lot more of Naomi's teachings on the podcast, the Family Herbalism podcast, because I want to say most of your episodes are solo, right? And they range around 30 minutes, and I feel like we just got a little crash course in Naomi's teaching style, but really you go in depth on a lot of different topics on your podcast. Would you say did I get that right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love the educational aspect of herbalism and just sharing all the good news about herbs. And I also am fascinated by how the body works, and I love sharing what I've learned about it.
How long have you been doing the podcast for?
It has been almost 3 years. Yeah,
Um,
almost 3 years, and almost every single week, actually, I release a new
wow.
episode.
You were mentioning before how you would kind of start something and you'd kind of back out because you got scared or whatever, and then you felt like God inspired you to continue along with these certain projects that you've been doing. Do you feel like you've kind of reaped the rewards of staying consistent with this podcast as a project?
Absolutely. When I started the podcast, it was actually as an alternative to doing Facebook videos, because that's how I started offering the free educational aspect of my work. And I had decided to get off social media for a while, and I wanted to keep that educational work going. I wanted to keep staying in touch with the people who had been following me and attending these classes. And so that's how the podcast was born.
That's cool. And I feel like through the podcast, it probably reaches a lot more people. Then you're building this like library of available content that just lives forever. And, there is a little bit of a learning curve when you start a podcast, but then you realize once you get into it, it's not that difficult to keep it going. Well, it's difficult to create the content, but as far as like uploading and distributing, that part's the simple part. And I was originally going to do this, but I'm on your podcast page right now, which is, again, Laurel Tree Wellness llc.com, and you just click on the podcast link. And of course, most people are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. But just some of your titles are awesome. And I listened to Water as Medicine today, which we might have time to get into a little bit more here in a bit. But then you got last episode was Gallbladder Sludge, constipation. So that's 43 minutes of listening to Naomi talk about constipation. You got to do that. Raising naturally healthy children, essential oils for pain and inflammation. And actually, I was kind of curious about this. Do you do it in seasons? Because I noticed you went back to like episode 1, whereas before you were all the way up to episode 67. How's that work?
Yes. So right now I'm on season 4, and
gotcha.
I kind of, I don't have a set number of episodes that I'm aiming for. It really has more to do with what is my vision for this season on the podcast. And so each one kind of had its own vision. Season 2 was a short season, but it was all interviews with other practitioners who are in the holistic health world.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's just a wealth of knowledge. These are podcast episodes, but they're really like in depth. Like this, this is an interview, Nutritional Healing with Dr. Keith Sheehan. That's 67 minutes. Fatty liver disease and milk thistle, 41 minutes. So yeah, these are just like master classes on each of these individual topics. So I highly encourage you to go listen to the Family Herbalism podcast with Naomi Kilbreth. But we brought this up a couple times, and I just kind of was curious if you kind of give like a brief rundown of your water episode. I thought you made so many great points, and you delved into areas of the subject that I wasn't even sure you were going to. And yeah, so why don't you just kind of talk about water as medicine?
Absolutely. So I feel that water is undervalued. We talk about food as medicine, which it absolutely is, but we can live 3 weeks without food, but only 3 days without water. It's very important. And when I work with clients one-on-one, I notice patterns. And one of the patterns that I notice is that many of the people, when they first come to see me, a lot of them are chronically dehydrated. And simply by adding water into their lives, they can get a lot of relief for their symptoms. It can improve their sleep. It can improve their memory and their cognition. It can improve their pain. In fact, one of the first clients that I worked with where this really hit home, I realized that he was mostly just drinking coffee and he had a lot of joint pain. And I thought, I bet that if you started drinking more water, you'd probably feel a little better. And so we were having this conversation and he said, there is one day a week where I visit this cafe with friends and I don't really like their coffee, so I drink water instead. And I usually feel better on that day. And I thought,
That's awesome.
My goodness, like that's just, sometimes we go about our days and we don't even think about it. We get distracted. And I think that's probably one of the bigger concerns for people who are chronically dehydrated is they just don't think about it because they're so busy going about their day-to-day routines. I do the same thing. I go through seasons where I'm like, I really need to catch up on my water. I've got a water deficit going on here. But there's other aspects to water as well. We use it when we make tea. We use it, in all kinds of like compresses and different types of herbal medicine. And then there are other water therapies too that rightly get a lot of focus in the health world, like using a sauna or hot and cold treatments, cold plunging. So water can be even a therapy all by itself. But dehydration is a concern for a lot of people. And so I like to create episodes that are relevant to a lot of people that I work with so that I can send them to those podcasts for more information where we only have maybe 30 or 60 minutes together one-on-one. And I really want to maximize that time together. So I'll say, hey, go check out this episode. It'll tell you more about why water should be really important in your life for this, for this purpose, as well as many others in their case.
So I do drink coffee and other stimulants like green tea on occasion. And I'll notice like if I maybe a little tired that day, I'm like, oh, I should have a cup of coffee. And then I have another cup of coffee. And then I'm like, oh, I'll have another one. And then I'll notice that I'll just get caught in this loop. And I realize, oh, I need water. And if I drink too much coffee, I become overly wired and I start to get like, I don't know, non-energized. I have like the opposite effect. And then I'll take a swig of water and I'll instantly feel so much better. And I know everyone's constitution is different, but that's what happens for me. So water is absolutely important. I know during the episode, you also talk about what you answer the big question, what type of water to drink is the best type of water. And I would say since 2011, I've been harvesting, I don't know if that's the right word, spring water. And I use a website called findaspring.com. And it's been very useful for me as when I lived in Oregon, now I live in Wisconsin. So I've got a new spring that I found on this website. So if you're looking for spring water, if that's your water of choice, I highly encourage you to check out findaspring.com. I don't know if you have any opinions on that or anything else that I just said.
I had never heard of that website before, so I appreciate you sharing that resource. That's great.
Totally.
Spring water would definitely be my preferred source if you're concerned at all about about the water you have available to you. We did rely on spring water ourselves up until we were able to get our water filtration system going to the point that we feel very safe drinking rainwater. But
Cool.
Spring water was very important to our family for a while when one of our kids was dealing with an autoimmune condition and it was kind of out of hand. And so we were trying to minimize as much toxin intake and exposure as possible. And that was a crucial piece of it for sure.
Yeah, and dear listener, do your own research. I mean, if you're getting spring water, you're gonna want to make sure it's safe and all that stuff. But I feel very trusting of the water source I use because my spring, the one that I use, is actually on someone else's land that they gave me permission for, which is really cool. And their family's been using it for generations. But you could test it. You could test it for the minerality and all that stuff. So yeah, findaspring.com. It has been an invaluable resource for me and my family over the past decade plus. So well, it's getting close to the time, but I know we wanted to talk a little bit about your experience homeschooling your kiddos. So can you tell us a little bit about homeschooling?
I would love to do that. Homeschooling is near and dear to my heart. So I have 4 kids. We have 4 kids, and our oldest is actually getting ready to graduate. And so this is a really exciting time of his life and our lives. And, as homeschoolers, It's really nice to be able to see all of that work come together in this culmination of him being able to accomplish this season of his life, his educational goals. Yeah. We're closing in on the end of the school year. We only have 5 weeks left to go at the time of recording here. And so our kids are in 7th grade, 8th grade, 10th, and 12th. And I have homeschooled them almost all the way through. We did a brief stint at a private school where I was still actively working with them, but not technically homeschooling. So it's really been a village effort. I feel like my mom's been involved. I've had different friends involved for different seasons and different classes and things, but to be able to be directly involved in our children's education the whole way through has been such a gift. I love spending time with my kids, so that helps.
That's helpful.
Yes. And I will say also, if anyone's listening who has young kids that they're homeschooling, I would just like to offer you the encouragement that it actually gets easier as they get older. I always thought it would be super hard to homeschool high schoolers, but it's actually the opposite. I feel like it has gotten only more easy and enjoyable as they've gotten older. So that's, if that is encouragement to anybody, I hope that is heard. On a daily basis, we do our group lessons together, and then the kids kind of go off and do their own lessons. And that's when I start jumping into the behind the scenes work of Laurel Tree Wellness. And then in the afternoons, 2 days a week, I actually leave and go to my office in Auburn, where I meet with clients. And I timed my schedule in such a way that even though my kids are older and technically they're fine being on their own, that they're really only home alone for like 2 to 4 hours those couple days a week, just because I feel like it's important to their growth and development to have the support of parents nearby as much as possible. And so the way that I structured it, they're only home alone that long before their dad comes home, their papa, and he'll make supper for them and spend time with them. And so the kids are almost always together with family. But our homeschooling it just fits into the lifestyle that we've created together as a family.
Did you teach them herbalism at all? Was that part of their curriculum?
Not technically, but it definitely works its way into their lives. That's for sure.
That makes sense. So is your oldest the one that's graduating? Is he going to be going off to college or anything, or doing something else?
At this point in time, he's going to be going into the trades. So
Nice.
He's been starting to work with my husband. My husband's a carpenter. And so he has been, and so he's been bringing my son in to do, some assistant work. And he's been able to experience flooring and wall building and sheetrocking and some different things. So he's certainly curious about what the different trades are and what he might be able to learn more about and kind of jump into. So we'll see. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think there's plenty of time, I guess, for him to figure it out. And this will be a great way for him to just get his feet wet and see what's out there.
The trades are where it's at. I mean, you get a really solid living wage, and then you don't go into a mountain of debt by going to college. So absolutely. And finding skilled workers in the trades can be difficult too. I've heard every time I bring that up with different business owners, there's like, yeah, this is great because we need all the more skilled, people in the trades as possible. Absolutely. Do you have a few more minutes? I wanted to ask you about your Herbalist text chat support.
Absolutely.
Sweet.
So the Herbalist Chats program is an extension of what I do with my clinical work. I found that a lot of my clients, as I work with them, they kind of, their knowledge of home herbalism grows. And so they gain confidence and they don't really need me as much, which is actually kind of exciting to work yourself out of a job, knowing that there's all the more home herbalists out there. But they still sometimes have questions, like, can I put these two herbs together? Can I give my kid this herb? Can I take this herb with this medication? And so there's just like these quick questions that come up.
So cool.
And I thought, what better way to create a safe container for that than to actually create a chat support program Sometimes the clients will ask these questions and then they apologize, like, I'm sorry to bother you on a Saturday morning, or, I'm sure you're busy, but if you have time. And so by creating this, it took that pressure off from them. So now they feel safe and encouraged to ask those questions as part of their learning journey themselves.
Did you make that up?
I did.
That's brilliant. I absolutely love it. I'd never seen it before. And when I was researching for the episode, I saw it and I was like, I have to ask about this. Would you recommend to other clinical herbalists implement something like that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a great opportunity to connect with current clients and also to build bridges, because some of the people who meet me, maybe they heard about me through the podcast or they were referred by a friend. They want to work together, but they're not quite sure if they're ready for full consultations. And so we'll use this as a way to kind of start that ball rolling and see if we're a good fit for each other. I would say that it's important that anyone considering this would also consider their boundaries. Do they feel comfortable setting their phone down, putting it on mute, and kind of figuring out when they're ready to hear from clients and when they need to take a break? Having healthy boundaries is really, really important for you to be fully present with your clients when you're meeting with them, even if that's in a chat support context. But yeah, I have definitely enjoyed having this available to my clients and would recommend it to other herbalists.
You use the word boundaries, and that's kind of what I was thinking of when I first read about this whole concept of having a text relationship with clients. You're almost creating like a business boundary. Like, okay, you're paying for my expertise here, and I think they appreciate that as well. And like you said, feel less guilty texting you at odd hours of the day to ask you their herbal questions. So that's a great idea. I will be sure to leave a link to that in the podcast show notes as well for the listener who wants to look more into your pricing structure and all of that, because I know you have like bulk packages and whatnot. So, well, this has been awesome, Naomi. Do you have any like closing thoughts before we wrap up and get out of here?
Well, I really appreciate you having me on the show, Mason. It's been a great conversation, and I hope it's blessed a lot of people. I think if I were to leave a couple of thoughts, it would just be that reminder that there are Christian herbalists out there. And if you need help finding a Christian herbalist, you can either go to the christianherbalistguild.org, or you can also reach out to me personally. I'm happy to make referrals. If I do currently accept clients, I have room for new clients, but if you want to find a local person, I may be able to help you find somebody. And then also for those parents out there who are raising their kids, if you're feeling like you really want to pursue herbalism, but you're not able to travel right now or don't have the time for the education in a full like in-person class setting, don't let that stop you. Herbalism is for everyone, and I think there are many ways to learn. And so this is a season for you to raise your kids, yes, but you can also just take that herbalism education one step at a time, and you'll get there. You'll get there when the time is right.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Naomi. We really appreciate you joining us on the show. Shout out to y'all for listening. Big shout out to Amanda for editing these episodes, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Thanks so much for watching today's episode of the Herbalist Hour. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want more great herbal content, be sure to subscribe to our HerbRally YouTube channel. If you enjoy these Herbalist Hour episodes and you'd like to join us live, you can do so by becoming an HerbRally Schoolhouse member. Learn more at herbally.com/schoolhouse. And if you want to get your first 30 days for free, use coupon code YouTube30 at checkout. So our HerbRally Schoolhouse members get access to exclusive video classes, monographs, and a lot more herbal community discounts, along with joining these live Herbalist Hour interviews. So one more time, herbally.com/schoolhouse. Enter coupon code YouTube30 at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. All right, we'll see you in the next episode, and take care.